A lifetime in community football. From a mascot in a grand final in the country in 1958 through to a community media superstar. A great journey along the way, a pioneer and the first media person to be inducted into the SFNL Hall of Fame. This is the Daryl Pitman story.
Daryl Pitman, a very honourable person and a very passionate person towards local football, and an absolute icon when you talk about media in local football.
Daryl Pitman, thanks for your time. I've been looking forward to this one.
Well, it's an absolute pleasure, Ian. It's great to catch up.
A pioneer of media and community football, and much of what we do in the media team today is a result of all your efforts early on.
Well, we had a good time, we had lots of fun, and it was fly by the seat of the pants stuff, but a lot of great memories in there.
I know exactly what you mean about fly by the seat of your pants. Let's backtrack to the very, very beginning of the Daryl Pitman story in association with football. I believe there was a 1959 grand final with Hamilton, where you may have been the mascot. Reasonable research there. Tell us a bit about that, though.
Yes, well, my father played for Hamilton, played alongside Fred Fanning and some great, and against some great players. And I was about 7.5 years of age, I think, in that 59 grand final. And there were as many mascots as there were senior players, but it was the first time that Hamilton and Imperials, the town's two teams, had ever played off in a grand final against each other. The only time they ever played, because they now no longer exist. So the whole town was there and more, and was standing room only. In fact, if you see, there are shots there of the team, and you can see the people up the grandstand. They're standing on the steps of the grandstand, and they were 5-6 deep right around the ground. So I have great memories of it. I remember parts of that vividly. I remember bloke called, I think it was Stan Gunn, got up on the table. He had his arm in plaster and he sang. They ran through the briars and they ran through the brambles, the Johnny Horton hit of the time, but putting the words to it. And he got up on the dressing room table after the game and sang that song. I remember that. I remember it clearly.
Great memories of the day. Yeah, you remember who won the game?
Hamilton.
Very good.
Hamilton, and it was a long time before they won their first premiership.
So a young fella growing up out that way perhaps, but more importantly, move somewhere to the city, at a playing career with East Caulfield Footy Club and then East Malvern. East Caulfield, originally Caulfield, but changed the name.
That's right.
At some point, just to differentiate.
Changed in 71 because of the VFA Caulfield.
Now we're talking to a man who made his senior debut as a 17-year-old at that football club.
Yes, I would have been 17. It was 1969, so I would have been 17. And I remember my first ever senior game. My opponent was Pat Sheedy.
Right.
Pat could have just rolled on me at any time and killed me. I was 8.5 stone, wringing wet. And I've often thanked him over the years for not doing that. But he looked after me. I was only a skinny little kid. So I remember that first game against Glen Huntly behind the race course there.
Tell us a bit about Daryl Pitman, the footballer.
Never big enough or fast enough to play higher, but I loved my footy. I was all my life I was footy mad. I used to take a football to bed with me, and as a kid, and just loved my footy. So I lived for my sport. I lived for my footy in the winter and cricket during the summer. But as I say, I was small. I always played as a rover or a winger. I gave it away reasonably early because of my ankle.
There was an injury, an ankle injury. So that meant that you didn't have a full career, perhaps, but... No,
and I had extra responsibilities at work and I had a very young family, so they all combined to not be able to allow me to get to training anyway. But as it was towards the end, when I gave it away, I couldn't get through a full game with my ankle.
So where does the link come from a young player with an ankle injury into football media?
Well, funnily enough, I'd always been interested in journalism. As a kid, I used to type up stories like a Sporting Globe story and type up the results of the game and talk about the game. And 60 years later, I'm still doing it. But I always loved doing that, and I used to call horse races with marbles. I'd push the marbles around the room, and each marble was a different horse, and I'd call the races as well, and all silly things like that.
Yeah.
I was just sports mad, and I loved commentating and all that sort of stuff. And in 1984, Southern FM was starting up.
Mm-hmm.
So they had one test broadcast at a weekend that I'd missed. It was the only one I ever missed, and I joined them shortly after that first test broadcast. And they threw the sporting role at me, so I gladly accepted that, and I was hooked from then on.
So I guess we're all pretty lucky that happened in some ways, because community radio stations cover all sorts of other subjects along the way, live music and religious festivals. That they gave you sport as something to concentrate on, which was lucky, wasn't it?
Well, that's right. Well, they said, "What are you interested in?" I said, "Sport." Mm-hmm. Love my music as well,
sure.
But I was really interested in local sport,
yep.
community sport, and that was always a passion. And to be able to promote the local clubs on the airwaves and talk to people about what was happening was great. It was a great opportunity, and I enjoyed it.
What's your first love when it comes to footy media, for argument's sake? Is it the written word or is it broadcasting?
I've been asked this recently, and look, it's probably a toss-up. Probably broadcasting, because it's more spontaneous, live, and in the moment, whereas a written word, you've got a chance to go back over it and change it, and all that sort of stuff. But the spontaneity of broadcasting with radio and television, I think is probably the winner.
There's a changeover somewhere too, and I've noticed this myself, and your love for football and sport. But years later, what was driving you? It was probably more the love of the broadcasting than the football.
Yes. In recent years with the TV show, there was always just so many facets of it. Mm-hmm. There's the game to call, but there's stories to do. There's stories to do about volunteers who are the lifeblood of our clubs. There are stories to do about people in clubs, about the players, about what's happening with local football. And there was always something. You could have a 4-hour show and you'd be able to fill it when it comes to community football.
Plenty of content, isn't there? And that still remains the same today. The Southern Footy Show, which initially started, I think, in 1997.
Yes.
Channel 31.
Yes.
What was the link there between the Southern FM and the Footy Show?
We actually were between Southern FM and the Footy Show. Well, when I was at Southern FM, when we got our full-time licence in 1990, I began a 3-hour Sunday morning sports show, 9 till 12 every Sunday,
Southern
which
Sport.
I did for 10 years. I did 500 shows, and a component of that during the winter months was a half-hour or hour segment on the Southern Football League. Oh, sorry, the South East Suburban Football League. It was then when we started. In the early test broadcast, it was the South East Suburban Footy League. So it sort of evolved from that, and we did the grand final in 1991. It was East Brighton and Noble Park, I think. We broadcast that on the radio live, so that was a first. We did each grand final up to 1996. And then in 1997, when we started the TV show, of course, we then started weekly broadcasts of the Match of the Day in the Southern Football League.
Good one to start, 291, East Brighton, Noble Park. I believe East Brighton came from 4th or 5th or something out of the cheap seats and knocked off Noble Park. Exciting game.
It was, and of course our mate Bernie Bennett was a star in that game.
Yeah.
Those big, long torps he used to kick.
Yep.
And he played a great game that day. He was a good leader at East Brighton.
Yeah, okay. So the Southern Footy Show that many of us watched over a long period of time on Channel 31 was all about the Southern Football League at the time. What inspired that?
Well, I was sitting there one day watching TV, and the Diamond Valley, the Northern Footy League now, but then known as the Diamond Valley Football League, had a show on. And I watched it and I thought, we could do that. We could do that for the Southern Football League, why not?
Yeah.
So I approached a friend of mine, Wayne Seth Steele, who's been the technical guru behind the show right through all the radio broadcast and the television. And he said, yes, we can do that. So we ended up shooting it in the bedroom of a friend of John's,
Right.
a retired gentleman a widower, and he had a spare bedroom. He was a former video editor in his job. So he had this room set all up nicely for us, and so we'd go around there every Monday night and do the show in his bedroom. So we did that for a number of years before I started doing it at my office.
Yeah, and office of Village Graphics, I think.
That's right.
That's right. So it was all done there. Pretty extravagant setup with the sets and all of that sort of stuff. It was a full-on production, wasn't it?
Yes, it got a little bit more streamlined as we went on, of course, and with the technology improving, so that we were able to do a lot of things digitally and that. Whereas the first shows we did in the early years was what they call crash editing on the VHS system, and that we were there till 4 o'clock in the morning some nights.
The edit's probably the most time-consuming thing, isn't it? Yeah. Okay. So after many years, I think to 2008, off the top of my head, it would have been, the Southern Football League show on Channel 31 evolved into the local footy show.
Channel 31 had been after us for years to do a generic local footy show, and we always said, no, Southern's our league. We're passionate about the Southern Footy League, parochial, and all that sort of stuff. But then it transpired that AFL Victoria wasn't keen on the leagues having their own shows. So I said, well, okay, we can still do a show. We can go and get our own sponsorship funded, and that's what we did for the next 8 years.
If I recall, it was a pretty tumultuous time too around there with the changes, and everybody had a view about where it had to go. But to the credit of everybody involved at your end, it became a much bigger and better product with a much broader appeal.
That's right. Plus, we were also able to promote the Southern Football League. So we did quite a few Southern games, and always did stories on what was happening in the Southern Footy League as well. So we were able to still keep our feet in that camp.
The local footy show, Daryl used to get out and get the sponsorship for that show. And it's interesting that some of those sponsors are still sponsors of the Southern Footy League now, like the Leader newspaper, the Bendigo Community Bank at Dingley, and also the Sandown Dogs. So their longevity that he was able to go out, and they got on board because of the footy show.
So there was a media communications role with the SFL prior to that.
For 1 year.
For 1 year.
My last year there, I was at media communications.
It's interesting, we go forward to today, and the Southern Footy and Netball League has a media officer on the payroll. So you're kind of ahead of your time back then.
Yes, well, it was sort of, and it was a marriage of two organisations, Southern FM and Southern Football League, because I was strongly in both camps. So I wore a few hats, I suppose. And one crossed over to the other very easily because it was hand-in-glove stuff, because Southern FM was there to promote local community, Southern Football League was local community, and it worked well. Yeah,
so an experienced media operator by this time. There were a few awards along the way too. What did they mean?
They meant a lot because it meant that what we were doing was being appreciated, and that we weren't wasting our time and just playing at radio hosts or TV hosts, or that it was appreciated what was being done. And we won our Best Sports Show Award in 1999 when it was the Southern Football League, and we won 2 or 3 more along the way with the local footy show. And that was great because they were national awards. That was national, the 4 or 5 community television stations nationally. It was picking the best show out of all those states, they meant a lot.
What are some of your greatest memories of those years? Southern firstly, and then even just into the wider product with the local show.
Well, Southern was very. The league was new. It was a new name. It was a new league. I remember Steve Crespin and Jeff Hunter were there at the start, and everything we did was sort of new. The football record was. We designed it ourselves to suit.
So you really shaped that yourself, didn't you?
To suit the time, and it was just a challenge all around. And the memories of the early days, particularly on the radio, were just getting the game to where when we started doing live games, climbing people's fences, and you wouldn't believe it.
Setting up radio and TV could always be a bit of a drama. There was a day at Moorabbin Kangaroos where we didn't have a phone line because they'd had their phone cut off down there. So we had to go into one of the houses, and we spoke to this young girl who said, yeah, it's fine, just use our telephone line, not a problem. But when her dad came home, he was fuming. And I reckon it was about halfway through the first quarter, he was ready to pull the plug. and Daryl sort of just tapped me on the shoulder, keep on commentating the game, while he tried to just placate the guy who was fuming. Anyway, a couple of bottles of wine fixed that. There were other times where we really did struggle to get a broadcast to air because of phone lines. We used to, we jumped the back street, into the back streets at Balwyn to get a line up and running with a person there. And down there at Springvale, our cord used to go across the street and into the house in the side street so that we could get a telephone line to get to air. We never not got to air. We always got to air the whole game. We never had to pull the plug on any of our broadcasts.
These are remarkable stories too. Like getting someone's phone line and giving them a couple of bottles of wine to pay for it. That's amazing stuff, Daryl.
Well, it is. We did a game at Moorabbin one day. Moorabbin, who were they playing?
This is the Kangaroos?
Yes, Moorabbin Kangaroos at Widdop Crescent there. And we couldn't, there was no phone line. So we thought, what do we do? So
and you need the phone line, of course, to go back to the studio with your, with your audio signal.
That's right, and we didn't have the van. We used to hire a truck, a taut liner. And we pulled up on the slope there at Moorabbin and no phone line. How do we get the game to air? So across the road, and there's this teenager home, and we said, look, can we borrow your phone for 3 hours? We'll pay you, we'll fix you up, whatever. Oh, yeah, right, eh? So we plugged in, and then his dad came home and wasn't happy at all. So we're trying to call the game while the father's telling us off, and so I wanted to keep calling, and Benny or I would, we went and spoke to him and said, no, look, this is what we're doing, and he said, oh, that's all right then. So anyway, he let us do it, and then the following week on the show we thanked them and we dropped off some bottles of wine for them, and they loved it. That was all good then, but we did that a number of times. Pete, I can't think of his surname, behind the Springvale ground at Newcomen Road there. We often used to run the line across into his place, and he was a Springvale District supporter, and especially in the finals, and he'd come across and he'd say, you need my phone today, boys? Yeah, we do, thanks, Pete. So we had a few of those. We had to do it at McKinnon one day. We got there to do a game. We used to do it from the scoreboard. And the phone had been chopped off during the week and nobody had told us. So we got there and had no phone. So we had to go and sweet talk a house behind the scoreboard there, and we ran the line into their place.
So there's stories about clubs having phone lines, and they often use it for their FPOS machines. So while you're on air calling the game, they couldn't do any FPOS transactions.
Yeah, well, I suppose that would have been the case.
Yeah, they do, and then the broadcast gets interrupted. Amazing stories, just amazing stories. And talk about flying by the seat of your pants, that's certainly the case.
And people pulling the PowerPoint out a lot of times too, the plug out when we were
I know that feeling. All the lights go off and the signal goes dead on the spot. You're really passionate about the heritage of local football in particular, aren't you?
I am, because I believe that so much of it can get lost. And once it's gone forever. It's lost the history. And there are so many fascinating stories about local footy history. All the old leagues, the Saturday morning leagues, the Sunday leagues, the Wednesday afternoon industrial league. And every little two-horse town had its own footy club. That's not the case anymore these days. But back in the mid to late 20th century, everyone had a footy team. A lot of big workplaces had their own footy team that played in a regulated competition.
ANZ Bank, State Bank,
Exactly.
Daryl really likes the history of local footy, and he hates it when the facts are distorted, when leagues or clubs distort the facts to their own benefit, and sooner or later they become the fact. In fact, they're not the fact at all.
Presumably you've collected over the time a huge collection, if you like, of footy memorabilia from those days, things that you've collected along the way.
Yes, there's a lot of... I've always been a great advocate of a local football museum. I reckon we need one because so much of this stuff does get lost, and we need somewhere to put this gear.
Is that something that you're passionate enough about to maybe consider doing going forward?
It would be. I always said when I retired that'd be something I'd look very closely at because I've come across it so often in my time that what do we do with this? What do we do with Icy Hamilton's 4 all-nut trophies in the Federal League? That's a record. What do we do with his McKinnon blazer? I've got the blazer of the Caulfield Federal League team's only premiership coach. They only won one federal premiership in 1949. Big blazer with the gorillas on the pocket.
They
used to be the gorillas. There's a lot of good stuff out there.
There is, and I'd probably suggest that most clubs have got a little part of it and they don't know what to do with it.
No,
And I've
no.
seen some that have got a huge collection, so yeah, that may be an option for the future. There's been a lot of awards and honours along the way. Life membership of the Southern Football and Netball League. That was pretty important to you as well.
That was a great honour. I treasure that highly, and it was very humbling.
Life slowing down a little bit for you now. I know you recently lost your beautiful wife,
Yes.
Helen. And coming up now to a special ceremony where you're inducted into the SFNL Hall of Fame. What does that mean to you, Daryl?
I'm very emotional about this at the moment. I'm sorry.
I understand, mate. I understand. Take your time.
I guess the thing was, my wife Helen was also always so encouraging.
Number one supporter.
Number one. And I spent so much time away from home, especially in those days where I was calling a game on a Saturday and I'd come in and do the 3-hour Sunday morning show. That was 1.5 days of the weekend away from my young family. So that's the reason why I gave the Sunday radio away.
Yeah, sure.
But she was such a great supporter that when you get accolades like this, half of it's for her.
Yeah, you're right. And it still is, Daryl. So, that'll never change. So that's really important stuff.
Daryl's contribution to local football, well, obviously the Southern Football region is the catchment that he was most familiar with and put 30 years or more into it, in all forms of media, in terms of the written word, the spoken word on radio and the TV show, which went to not only people in the Southern Football region, but the local punter who loved local footy, and his contribution in that area, no one else matches it. He has promoted local football in the Southern Football League. He's got a great history at the Federal League, the South East Suburban and the Southern Football League, and he just loves the region and wants nothing but the best for the Southern Football region.
You have been just one of the most significant contributors to our competition. Local footy in general, we understand that in recent years, and of course that's unfortunately due to circumstances outside of your control, with changes made by the government, that won't continue. But the legacy that Daryl Pitman and his crew leave in local football and in the Southern football community in particular is significant. You've been a pioneer for us in the media team, and I just want to thank you for that personally.
Thank you.
And wish you all the very best in the future. Congratulations on induction to the Hall of Fame, Daryl Pitman.
Thank you very much, Ian. It's a great honour. Well done. Thank you.